Let's see if we're loading up here. Looks like we just went through. Hi, everybody. Making sure. Okay, good. We've switched locations today just to make sure we have a little bit better connectivity. I hope that works out for everyone. Making sure we have some folks joining us before we dive right in. Who's here? Hi, Sarah. So we sold, I think, about 20 or so bottles of wine, which is great. So we should have about 20 players, or at least 20 players with the actual wine. And I hope we've got a few others that are going to just be playing along. A friend of mine from Chicago said they might tune in. Hello. Hey, Sharon. Great to see you. Great that you're here. Thank you. Crystal, Jan, Steve. Great. All right. Krista's here too. Perfect. Everybody got their wine? It's a white wine. Did you chill it? We chilled it. It's right here. I'm going to pour it here just to get it in my glass. Before we start, I just wanted to say that I've been looking forward to this all week, and we've had a great week here, relatively speaking. And to say that, given the circumstances, I feel incredibly fortunate. And we have a wonderful team and a wonderful group of people, yourselves very much included, who support us, and we hope to in turn support you. And there are moments when it might feel a little weird to be just drinking wine and celebrating, but I think part of survival through something like this requires that you thrive at points, and there are highs and lows, and this can be a high moment. It certainly is a moment that I've been looking forward to, as I've said, all week. I enjoyed so much the interchange last week, and we're going to do a little bit of the same today. So I'm going to walk you through the process, the deductive process of blind tasting, with the one objective being, of course, to see if we can get this wine right. And I say we because I'm going to rely on you to give me some feedback along the way, especially with those of you who have the wine in front of you. But more so just to enjoy each other's company and to enjoy the opportunity to evaluate a wine and to heighten one's senses around the experience of enjoying this particular wine. So with that said, why don't we dive in and figure out what we've got in front of us. First and foremost, though, right, we're going to use our eyes and evaluate what we see. It's white, and so as we talked about last week, or for those of you that are just perhaps joining this time, we can rule out then probably sparkling wine. I don't see any bubbles in this particular wine. We can rule out rosé. We can rule out red, and we can't yet rule out a dessert wine, but or a fortified wine. And as Kelly put in last week, an aromatized wine. We'll get to that with the nose, but already half of the world of wine is gone. And so from a deductive perspective, we're trying to take the whole world, cut it in halves, cut it into chunks that we can at least set aside and begin to work our way through the wine from there. So it's white. It could be a certain series of varieties. White's a little bit more open-ended than, say, red. For example, you can get white juice from almost every grape on the planet. And so you could have a white Merlot, which would be a really jerky thing for Julie to afford me. Julie's sitting to the side of me here. That would be a very unfair blind taste. So I think, generally speaking, we're safe to assume that this is a white varietal. You look at the color, and the color is a little bit more golden on the spectrum of either sort of pale lemon, gold, and let's say amber, as sort of three just different benchmarks, with gold sort of being in the middle. There's a pale lemon element in one regard to this, and then there's a deeper kind of flint or flecked hue of something golden about this wine, which is indicative perhaps of the varietal, but more oftentimes of some kind of aging, and perhaps in some cases some residual sugar, botrytis, a late harvest application of winemaking that could be indicative of that color. So This wine has pretty continual profile. It has a little bit of a watery rim, but not a substantial variation there. That watery rim might give you some indication of a higher alcohol. And if it's higher alcohol, it's probably coming from someplace warmer. Generally speaking, warmth reflects the ability for the grape to grow up into its little ball of acid growing up into the bigger version of itself with acid and a sugar content. And if that warmth allows the sugar to develop, the more sugar you have in a grape, the more potential alcohol you have. And so therefore you're talking, generally speaking, about the world and the warmer places in the world. For myself, if it's helpful to you, I'll share it. I try to think about like a large map of the world and the places where grapes are grown on that map. And I try to travel to those places when I start to think about a wine and begin to check them off. And so as we start to funnel the world down into smaller parts that we think this wine could be from, you try to check off all the places that are warm versus cold. So if we're thinking already that this is a warm climate wine without having even smelled it or tasted it, what are those warm climate places and what are not, more importantly? Like, so if we're saying warm climate and then we went and chose, say, Austria or Germany as the varietal, we'd have to rethink kind of what we're saying here. So we're just initially trying to get a sense of what's at play. And this wine starts to say right off the bat, it's deeper, richer color. It has a potential to be a warmer climate. Some of those warmer climate varietals, let's say right off the bat, we could be talking about Chardonnay, we could talk about Semillon, we could talk about something richer in that scope. Hey, Michelle, the foxes are here. Sarah's chilled the wine. She's done what she's supposed to do. Okay, cool. So we're going to go our way into from appearance to the nose, right, to the aroma. And does it smell faulted or off? And last week's wine had a little hint of volatile acidity on the nose, and then that grew in throughout the experience of tasting the wine and really jumped out of the glass about a half an hour after we finished the conversation last week. And that was showing, that was throwing a little bit of the fruit character of that wine off. But I'm not necessarily getting anything here that is off. An off aroma would be things like wet cardboard, could be things like Band-Aid, nail polish remover, generally things that don't smell quite right. And sometimes they're a little bit faint, and that's okay. And other times they become real prominent and make the wine really not drinkable. And so in this case, no, I'm smelling just pure kind of fruit, a little bit of mineral, and some wood. And we're going to go into a depth with those particular components in just a second here. But it's clean. And how would you rate this? Is this something that's got an intensity visually? Is this really light? Is it medium, or is it extremely pronounced? I just said visually, excuse me. I mean, from the aroma perspective, is there a lot of aroma? Is it jumping out of the glass at you? Is it moderate, or is it really something that is kind of muted? Lauren's asking about the watery rim. Yeah, a watery rim or a variation of watery rim could be an indication perhaps of a higher potential alcohol or a higher alcohol wine. And that then led me to talk about higher alcohol wines being something that you might find from warmer climates, generally speaking. So that was that. But what do you smell? Thank you, Christy, and thank you, Ross, for delivering the "you rock" phrase. Medium aroma, Jan says. Thank you, Jan. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's medium. It has a pronounced quality to some of the characteristics here, but it's not super aromatic. It's tons of lemon for sure. Jennifer's asking, do whites cling to the glass like reds can? Yes, absolutely. And that clinging to the glass has something to do with alcohol and potential residual sugar. So it has much more to do with alcohol than it has to do with the varietal per se, although there's a relation to some varietals growing in warmer places and giving you more texture and viscosity, what we're talking about in that context, which is a derivative of alcohol, which is then a derivative of fermentation, which comes from the sugar that's in the grapes. And so, yes, tropical, Lauren says. We've got lemon. And those things are pretty prominent, right? When you're smelling this, the lemon is sort of fresh lemon pith, and a little bit of lemon zest. What else do you get? Tropical. Lauren, what kind of tropical? A lemony aroma, my brother says. Glad to see him here, although he might be helping my mom do this. So we're talking about fruit. We get lemon and a little bit of tropical fruit, right? How about an earthen profile? And from earth, you could talk about anything from wood bark to leaves to forest floor, and to, in this case, probably more appropriately, rocks, mineral, flintiness, things of that sort. How about anything earthen? Anything minerally? I'm definitely getting something, a little bit, a faint quality of that. And then wood. And wood shows itself in the way of spice notes, in a buttery quality perhaps. You'll find vanilla, oftentimes, sometimes cedar. I get a roasted corn quality, sometimes a corn on the cob element, buttered corn quality. Stephen gets a little bit of river rock. That's great. Yeah, I think that, and he would know, he's a good paddler, so he's been on the river many, many times. My brother confirms that it's not him necessarily doing this, my mom using his computer, which is just fine. All right, so we've got some tropical fruit notes, a little bit of river rock. Any spice, any vanilla, any cedar, anything along those lines that anybody smelling? Pencil lead, nice. A little bit of that graphite element. So there's a little bit of wood potentially. So we're thinking right off the bat from smell and from sight that we've got something a little bit richer, perhaps something a little bit warmer climate oriented, something that has lemon and tropical fruit flavor, aromas, excuse me. It has a little bit more body and viscosity we've established there. It has a little bit of river rock and maybe a touch of oak. Nothing that's super prominent, but something that's kind of there. So initially we're thinking about what types of grapes. Anything that jumps to mind right off the bat? A little bit of honeysuckle. Good. Very good. So what grapes can give you some of that? We've got creme brulee, that's coming through great. Yes, some of that. Todd, are you talking about a little bit of burnt sugar or more of the custard? Yeah, that is a very nice descriptor. I think I get more of the custard than the burnt sugar, but there is a confectionery note too to the sweet fruit element, that tropical fruit quality is coming through there. Good. I think that sets us up to think about a couple of different varieties. Perhaps first and foremost, I think that Chardonnay would be an option. We could talk a little bit about Chenin Blanc, for example, with some of that honeysuckle, and it would give you higher alcohol. But let's see what we can confirm on the palate. Sauvignon Blanc, sounding Viognier-ish, Sean was noting. Yeah. Viognier, we said it was kind of moderate in its aroma. It has qualities that are Viognier-ish in terms of its texture and its weight. We didn't really pick up on sort of the peach or apricot or a floral quality, but the honeyed element certainly I think is a signatory of some Viognier, especially Viognier in Virginia. You get some Virginia Viognier that has some element of the bee, from beeswax all the way to something honeyed, sometimes honeycomb in the middle, or honeysuckle, as was pointed out. So yeah, absolutely. When you taste this, rich flavor, Jan notes, yeah, this has got some richness to it. It's got a little bit of a burn in the back, right? So from the perspective of the taste as opposed to the flavors, we'll put the flavors aside for just a second. The taste is giving us, is this a dry wine? Let's rule that right from the start. We were talking about in the beginning, this could be potentially a late harvested wine, right? Is this a sweet wine? And the sweetness is something you'll determine from the back end of the experience. So after you swallow, or if you spit, the lingering quality of it, is there some residual sugar there? Is there something sweet there? And for me, my point of view, no. So this is a dry wine. There's no spitting in the Walter house. That's fair. This is to be enjoyed, and that's fine. I still have to drive home, so I'm going to spit my way through this one. Yes. So it's a dry wine. Acidity. Is this acidity low, medium, or high? And you're going to feel that acidity. Depends on who you are, but probably on the sides of your mouth. You're going to be salivating for a period of time. And are you salivating for less than a little bit? It's almost neutral once you've finished the swallow. Is it something that you're kind of feeling your salivatory glands going for a minute, let's say 20 seconds, or is it something that is long and you continue to salivate? I'm still salivating as I've been talking my way through this. So it's a pretty medium plus. Crystal points out. Yeah, I think medium plus is a really fair indication here. This is not as bright, vibrant, racy as Sauvignon Blanc was pointed out earlier. Maybe it's not Sauvignon Blanc kind of acidity, but it definitely has a ton of acidity. Medium plus. How about the alcohol? Alcohol can give you viscosity, can give you richness and texture, which we'll talk about in terms of the body, but also can give you sort of a retronasal, kind of in the back of your throat. Is there a little bit of a burn? Is there some heat? Another way I kind of feel it, you can kind of feel it in the back of your throat, much like having a spirit, and will leave a lingering kind of alcoholic burn toward the back of your throat. You can also, like, as you breathe out, you can still feel kind of the esters, the alcohol in the mouth. Does this wine present some of that heat? And I think, yeah, it's giving you kind of a medium plus, perhaps a little bit even high alcohol. It's in the medium plus range there. So it's got a little bit of heat, confirming what we thought we saw in the initial phases, right? So that this wine had a little bit of that watery meniscus. It had a little bit of potential to have a riper variation to it. It's a richer wine. So what about the body then as it relates to that? Alcohol always contributes to that, and there's a textural quality. And from a perspective of the body or the unctuousness of a wine, I've often used the example of sort of skim milk, 2% milk, and whole milk. Where does this sit in the spectrum? Is it light skim milk? Is it medium 2%-ish? Is it whole milk? Is it something in between? This is 2% plus. This is more on the whole milk side of things. It's got texture, it's got richness. So this is a wine that's dry, has a medium plus acidity, has a medium plus alcohol, right? Whole milk, Jan's saying too. And I think, yeah, it's got a pretty full body. And the finish. Finish helps you kind of determine the quality of a wine. Is this a wine that has sort of a 10-second or less finish? Is it gone out of your mouth within 10 seconds or so? And this is where it's a little bit tricky. You want to think about the actual finish of the experience of the wine, the flavors of the wine. They linger, not just the acidity or the tannin in some cases in red wine, because the acidity might linger. And we might be salivating for a long time, but it's not necessarily the finish of the wine. It's more the acidic component of the wine as opposed to the actual flavor components and the structure of the wine. Is it about 10 seconds or less? Is it sort of 30 seconds or so? Or is it longer than 30 seconds? And this is going pretty long. I mean, this is a medium to long finish, which indicates pretty nice quality in the production. So we have a really nice, beautiful wine that has texture, that has moderate plus alcohol and body. This is a really lovely wine. Let's talk then about the flavors that we're getting out of this wine. We talked about lemon curd, lemon peel, tropical flavors. We said there was some creme brulee, a little bit of some spice perhaps. What are you getting in the palate? Can you confirm any of those things? The grassy notes that were up front are now gone. A little bit of bark, maybe a little bit of mushroom, like a white button mushroom, kind of a more neutral mushroom. Yeah. I get a little bit of that lingering on the palate for sure. That's neat. A duxelle, kind of the chopped mushroom that you would saute with shallots to put into a beef Wellington. That's kind of there. That's nice. So it's earthen. So I've seen flash up a couple people talking about Chenin Blanc. We had Sauvignon Blanc for a minute, Chardonnay. Anything else? We had Viognier. I think those are all appropriate choices or appropriate initial thoughts. Kind of in this world too, you don't want to rule in or zone in on one particular thing to the exclusion of everything else. If you get a strong sense that this is the great thing and you're going to stick with that, make yourself a note. Like, I want to think this is Chenin Blanc. So Chenin Blanc it is. You work your way through all of what you've just said about it to make sure that that aligns with the idea and the concepts of Chenin Blanc. But then also broaden it a touch to think about a few other varieties that, just in case you were too tunnel visioned and too on that particular varietal, you might have missed something. So for example, let's use Viognier as an example. If we had said right off the bat, aromas start to make me think of Viognier, and then you start to try to find Viognier in the wine, is there enough about this wine that says, hey, I really want this wine to be Viognier, but is there enough in the wine that actually makes it Viognier, makes it so? Is there a floral quality to this wine, either on the nose or the palate? Anybody see that quality? Oh my gosh, Kristen, how are you? This is going back quite a ways. An old high school friend. Welcome. Super excited to have you here. Chris Shirley notes that it'd be great with beef stroganoff. Yeah, although that mushroom component to the beef stroganoff is wonderful, thanks to Little Mountain Mushrooms, who've been raising the chestnut mushrooms for us. They've been magnificent. Tran is asking about New World versus Old World. So last week we talked about New World versus Old World. Generally speaking, some acidity. If it's quite acidic, you think generally that you might be more on the Old World side versus the New World side. And that's just an indication, perhaps. I think you could get acidity like this from a cool spot in the Sonoma coast. You could get this from perhaps Oregon, in the way of, say, Chardonnay or even Chenin Blanc, perhaps, in either of those places. There are cool spots in, say, Chile that could produce some high acidity like this for sure as well. Absolutely in Australia, in the Mornington Peninsula. And if it was Riesling, for example, we could be talking about Eden or the Clare Valleys that have really cool climate in the New World. So it's not steadfast that, hey, that higher acidity means you're in the Old World, but it's an indication. So Jan had noted a couple moments ago, too, that she thought this was Old World, something French, which is something we certainly have to think about. So let's go back to Viognier for a second, though. Does anyone get a floral quality to this particular wine? I'm not getting something terribly floral, and so I wouldn't. And the orange blossoming element, the honeysuckle that was there a little bit before, it's not necessarily as prominent on the palate for me. So I wouldn't probably stick with a Viognier here. So let's work. No floral from Jan, thank you. Let's work on Chenin Blanc, right? So Chenin Blanc, some of the tells for Chenin Blanc would be the high acidity, which is good, the textural quality, which is good, the richer profile, which is good, the higher alcohol, the moderate plus alcohol, also good. Generally speaking, you could get sort of a lanolin, waxy element, a woolen quality. Sometimes it just smells sort of animally. A funky cheese quality, perhaps. You get sort of a yellow apple into stewed apple quality to Chenin Blanc. The honeyed element certainly can come through too. So how about those things? Anything along those lines? My cousin Frank is joining us. Thanks, Frank. Hi, Frank. How are you? Bit of oak and roundness, yeah. I don't get the appley element. I don't see that kind of here. I get more of that lemon and the tropical quality that we had picked up on previously, and the nose, and I think that's certainly still here on the palate, perhaps more so. And there's absolutely a bit of an oak profile coming through. So what oak elements are you picking up? Definitely apple, Brian says. Yellow apple? Yeah. There is some there. So Chenin Blanc, this could be a lovely Chenin Blanc. on the drier side of Chenin Blanc, which if it was Chenin Blanc, we have to think about then the Loire Valley, which gives us some potential there. The wood profile of this wine is fairly dominant. I'm getting kind of that spice, nutmeg, Crystal said. That's right. There's some spice that's coming through. There's a little bit of that sort of cedared element, sort of humidor, kind of tobacco box quality that might be here too. Sometimes wood for me too presents on the palate like chewing on a toothpick for too long, and it gets kind of wet and just lingers. When that wood tannin kind of lingers and comes through, I get that here on this particular wine a touch. So I don't know that this is a super new wooded, very prominent wine that has a bunch of wood on it, but it has some new wood, I think. So a percentage, let's say 25%, 30%, a third of it new, but it's definitely, I think, been aged in wood. It has a textural quality that has wood to it. So we're talking about Chenin Blanc, we're talking about Chardonnay, I think we should consider too. So on the Chenin side, some of that apple is coming out more. Yep. How about those tropical flavors? There's a quality of a bit of butter, right? There's a movie popcorn element, movie popcorn butter. It's the diacetyl is the technical term for the composition or the chemical compounds that from the malolactic fermentation. So think of malic acid. It's what happens as a malic acid transforms into lactic acid. Think of green apples. When you bite into a green apple, you get that tart acidity. That's malic acid. And then think of drinking milk. And milk has lactic acid. Milk without acid would be horrible. It would be so base. You need that acidity there, but the acidity is really round compared with the acidity that's super sharp in the way of a green apple. This has sort of a play on both. So I wouldn't be surprised if we're talking about partially new oak and oak aging and partial malolactation to give you some of that buttery quality and some of the acidity. And so with that being said, for me, I'm heading toward Chardonnay, but I'm going to for a moment and let you kind of chime in. Chris Shirley's already in. He's saying Chard for sure. Maureen is saying Chard, Chardonnay for sure. The Foxes are sticking to Chardonnay. And now it's a question there for them of where. You want to put a flag in a place, right? You're going to get texture and all that acidity from Burgundy, right? And you could get it from Oregon. You could get it from certain producers in California. The richness and the voluptuousness, the ripeness of this, if this was from Burgundy, we'd have to talk about perhaps more of a southern orientation of Burgundy. So the Macomb perhaps, the Côte Chalonnaise, something further south, could be a basic Burgundy from a riper year that would be something that has maybe a Côte de Beaune kind of orientation, but I don't think this is Chablis, for example. And while it's a lovely wine, it has a roundness and a richness that I would be probably a little less focused on Burgundy and perhaps more focused on the New World. But a New World that would give us a little bit more of the acidity. And so instead of thinking, say, Napa or Russian River Valley Sonoma, I would be more Sonoma Coast, perhaps Carneros, even with some of that richness and the acidity that would be in the southern part that actually straddles Sonoma and Napa, but also could work our way up into Oregon to the Willamette Valley and play in that particular place. I mentioned before the Mornington Peninsula in Australia, a little bit more vervy acidity and not quite the stuffing, the richness. I think this would be a little bit more mineral in orientation. So yeah, I think for me, I'm headed to Chardonnay more than I'm focused on Chenin Blanc. And it's mostly because of those qualities of the oak aging and of the malolactic fermentation of the winemaker's hand in this particular orientation. And I'm not getting sort of that woolly element that I would think about from Chenin Blanc. So Chardonnay. We worked our way through some of what would be Burgundy versus Oregon or California, I think I'm going to put Burgundy away, and I'm going to focus on a domestic Chardonnay. The quality of the Woodley, I think that acidity is bright and vibrant, and I I could go either way, comfortably make an argument for sort of Sonoma Coast and for the Willamette Valley. But I tasted some really beautiful Chardonnays when I was in Oregon and the Willamette Valley. And in fact, that was the major takeaway of my experience out there this past year when I got a chance to visit. I went, of course, expecting to taste wonderful Pinot Noir and interested in trying some Pinot Blanc and Pinot Gris, and I did. And there were some really interesting ones. And I knew I would taste some Chardonnay, but the Chardonnay that I got a chance to taste there was just mind-boggling and beautiful. And so I think the reality of what Willamette Valley has to offer will be some of the world's best Chardonnay in the next decade, which is exciting because they make some lovely Pinot Noir, no doubt about it. But just some spectacular that has great acidic texture. It integrates and uses oak beautifully. And so I'm going to stick to Chardonnay from the New World, from Oregon, from the Willamette Valley, and I'll say 2016 on this particular wine. What do you guys think? Oregon, give me the acidity. I've got Oregon from Maureen. Yeah, I've got Chardonnay picked up from Stephen. Perfect. Good. So Sean Malone says he loves Oregon Chardonnay, and me too. Shall we reveal? After a sip. Let's see. Oh my gosh. Well, it was a vintage off. This is Goodfellow, Marcus Goodfellow, the 2017 Willamette Valley Chardonnay. Beautiful wine and a heck of a guy. Really spectacular wines, working with great vineyards, one of which he helps really manage. And one of the best statements I've ever heard in terms of a winemaker's focus, not related to Chardonnay per se, but related to Pinot Noir. He said his goal in making Pinot Noir is to try to make the wine variation of Negroni, which is always a worthwhile pursuit. But with respect to Chardonnay, he's sourcing from a couple places, but in particular on the Ribbon Ridge. And this Whistling Ridge property has these undulating hills that roll sort of north to southeast exposition. And so some of the hillsides are facing more southeast and some are facing a little bit more northwest. And so you get this really wonderful interplay of ripeness and ripeness coming from the sort of southeastern facing slopes because they're getting the bulk of the sun throughout the day. And from the northwestern side of this kind of rolling hill, you get cooler quality. So you get bright acid and some of that ripeness, which is where the tension in this wine comes from, which is really special and pretty unique. That's awesome. Always enjoy drinking an Oregon Chardonnay, and especially enjoy it drinking with you guys. Thank you very much for joining us. It sounds like we've got a couple more takers happening for next week. I know Julie and Tony are working on another selection for next week. So I think we'll continue this. We'll meet up again on Thursday at 7. And if you'd like to play along at home, you can get that wine for next week right here at Field and Main. We're open this week. So if you're coming out this week, we are open tomorrow and Saturday, and we're going to close for Easter Sunday and Monday. And we'll open up again on Wednesday. So you can pick up this wine for next week or Saturday, or again on Wednesday or Thursday to play. So thanks so much. Wonderful to play with you. Cheers again next week.